The doors of the Plaza Hotel ballroom opened, and everything stopped. Sade Monroe stood at the altar in her custom Vera Wang gown, her hand resting lightly in Luca Voss's palm, the minister mid-sentence in their wedding vows. 400 guests, crystal chandeliers, flowers imported from 3 continents, the wedding of the decade. And then she walked in, Nyah Brooks, tall, elegant, wearing a white dress that brushed scandalously close to bridal. Her entrance was perfectly timed, exactly when the minister asked if anyone objected to this union. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because the moment Luca saw her, his hand went slack in Sade's grip. His face drained of color. His eyes, the eyes that were supposed to be fixed on his bride, locked onto the woman in the doorway, like she was the only person in the room, the only person who had ever mattered. Sade felt it before she understood it. The shift, the absence, the way Luca's soul seemed to leave his body and walk toward the door. "Luca," she whispered. He didn't respond. "Luca." Still nothing. The guests began to murmur. Phones appeared. The moment was already being captured, already being uploaded, already becoming a spectacle. Nyah smiled softly, the kind of smile that looked innocent, but carried a blade beneath it. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I couldn't let you marry someone else without telling you the truth." She took a step forward. "I made a mistake 10 years ago, Luca. I've regretted it every day since. And if there's any part of you that still feels what we had..." She let the sentence hang. And Luca, billionaire, groom, man who was supposed to be pledging his life to Sade Monroe in this moment, turned his back on his bride. He walked toward Nyah. 3 steps, 4, 5. He stopped in front of her, his back to the altar, to the minister, to the woman in the wedding dress, whose heart was shattering in real time. "Nyah," he breathed, like her name was a prayer he'd been holding for a decade. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Sade stood alone at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands, watching the man she loved choose someone else in front of 400 witnesses. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. And then something shifted inside her. Not grief, not rage, clarity. Sade set down her bouquet on the altar, slowly, deliberately. She removed her engagement ring, 3 carats, flawless, custom designed, and placed it beside the flowers. And then she did something no one expected. She walked, not toward Luca, not toward Nyah, not toward the exit in shame. She walked down the aisle like a queen departing her throne, head high, shoulders back, eyes forward. 400 guests watched in stunned silence as the bride they'd pitied became the most powerful person in the room. At the door, Sade paused. She didn't turn around, but her voice carried, clear and steady. "You don't deserve me, Luca, and one day you'll realize you just lost the only person who ever loved you for who you actually are, not who you pretend to be." The doors closed behind her, and Luca Voss stood frozen, Nyah's hand in his, finally getting what he'd always wanted, not realizing it was the beginning of losing everything. You just watched a bride get abandoned at the altar for another woman, 400 guests, a $10 million wedding, and a groom who turned his back on his bride the moment his white moonlight walked through the door. But you don't know who Sade Monroe really is. You don't know why Nyah Brooks chose this exact moment to return. And you don't know what Luca Voss is about to lose now that he's thrown away the woman who actually loved him. Because here's the thing about chasing ghosts from your past. Sometimes they lead you straight off a cliff. If you've ever been the backup choice, if you've ever loved someone who was still holding on to someone else, if you've ever wondered what it would feel like to walk away with your dignity intact, then stay with me. Because this story is about to show you that the person who walks away isn't always the one who loses. Hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see what happens when Luca realizes the truth. Now let me take you back 2 years. To the night Luca Voss met the woman he was too blind to see. Luca Voss had been haunted for exactly 10 years, not by anything supernatural, by something worse. A memory, a woman, a love he'd never gotten over, Nyah Brooks. They'd met at 28 and 20, both young enough to believe love conquered everything. She was a model, stunning and ambitious. He was a rising tech entrepreneur, hungry and driven. They'd burned hot and fast for 2 years, the kind of love that consumed everything in its path, and then she'd left. "I can't build my career in your shadow," she'd said, bags already packed. "You're becoming someone huge, Luca, and I need to become someone too, on my own." He'd begged her to stay, promised to support her dreams, offered everything he had. She'd walked away anyway, to Paris, to Milan, to a modeling career that made her famous, and a life that never quite included him. He'd followed her career from a distance, watched her magazine covers, saw her photographed with actors, athletes, billionaires, never him, and the wound never healed. He dated. Of course he dated. Beautiful women, successful women. Women who wanted to marry him, build a life with him, love him. But none of them were Nyah. None of them made him feel like he was enough and not enough at the same time. None of them haunted him the way she did. His therapist called it white moonlight syndrome, the tendency to idealize a past love, to compare everyone against a memory rather than a real person. Luca called it the truth. Nyah was the one, and he'd lost her, until he met Sade Monroe. It happened at a charity gala 2 years ago. Luca had been nursing a drink in the corner, counting down until he could leave, when a voice cut through his boredom. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else on earth." He'd turned to find a young black woman in a simple emerald dress, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo, her smile warm and slightly mocking. "That obvious?" he'd asked, only to someone who feels the same way. She'd extended her hand. "Sade Monroe. Luca Voss. I know who you are." She'd tilted her head. "You're the tech billionaire who never smiles in photos. I always wondered if that was a brand thing or a personality thing." Despite himself, Luca had smiled. Actually smiled. "Maybe both," he'd admitted. They'd talked for 2 hours. She was sharp, funny, unimpressed by his wealth. She worked in nonprofit development, raising money for education initiatives in underserved communities. She'd grown up in Brooklyn, worked her way through Columbia on scholarships, and built a career helping people who reminded her of where she came from. She was nothing like the women he usually met, nothing like Nyah, and maybe that's why he'd asked her to dinner. Over the next 18 months, Sade Monroe became something Luca hadn't experienced in years: peace. She didn't demand he perform, didn't need him to be on all the time. She saw through his walls, called out his nonsense, and made him laugh. Really laugh, for the first time since Nyah left. She loved him, actually loved him. Not his money, not his status, not the idea of being Mrs. Luca Voss. Him. The real him. The version he hid from everyone else. So when he'd proposed 6 months ago, she'd said yes through tears of joy. And Luca had almost convinced himself that he was over Nyah. Almost. But Sade had noticed things. The way Luca's expression flickered whenever Nyah's name appeared in a headline. The way he kept a single photograph from their relationship in his desk drawer. He thought she didn't know, but she did. The way he sometimes looked at her like he was searching for someone else. She'd asked him once, early in their relationship, "Do you ever think about your ex, the model?" Ancient history, Luca had said, but his eyes had told a different story. Sade had loved him anyway, because she believed that showing up, choosing someone every day, eventually won out over ghosts. She'd been wrong. Standing at that altar, watching Luca walk toward Nyah like he was drawn by gravity, Sade had finally understood. She'd never had all of him. She'd been competing with a ghost the entire time, and the ghost had finally shown up to claim what Sade never really had. So she'd done the only thing she could do. She'd walked away with her dignity intact, because Sade Monroe refused to beg for a love that should have been freely given. And Luca Voss, watching her leave, had no idea what he'd just thrown away. The wedding fell apart in slow motion. After Sade's exit, the ballroom descended into chaos. Half the guests were filming on their phones. The other half were scrambling to leave, unwilling to be associated with the social disaster unfolding in front of them. Luca's mother, Victoria Voss, marched toward her son with murder in her eyes. "What have you done?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what this is going to cost us?" Luca barely heard her. He was still staring at the doors where Sade had disappeared, something cold settling in his stomach. He started. The Monroes are one of the most connected families in East Coast philanthropy, Victoria continued, her voice shaking with fury. Sade's uncle sits on 3 corporate boards. Her aunt is the Secretary of Commerce's chief advisor. You just publicly humiliated their niece in front of 400 witnesses. Luca blinked. What? You didn't know? Victoria laughed bitterly. Of course you didn't. You were too busy mooning over your ex-girlfriend to actually learn anything about the woman you were marrying. The words hit Luca like ice water. Sade had never mentioned her family's connections, never dropped names, never leveraged her background to impress him. She'd just been herself, and he'd never bothered to look deeper. Meanwhile, Nyah stood beside him, her hand still resting on his arm, her expression serene. Maybe we should go somewhere private, she suggested smoothly. Give everyone time to calm down. Luca nodded numbly, letting her guide him toward a side exit. But as they walked, something nagged at him. The timing. Nyah showing up exactly during the vows, the white dress, the perfect entrance, the speech about making a mistake. After 10 years of silence, why now? Why today? They ended up in a private suite upstairs. Nyah poured him a drink, her movements graceful, familiar. I know that was dramatic, she said, settling beside him on the couch. But I couldn't let you make the biggest mistake of your life. Mistake? Marrying her. Nyah's voice was gentle, concerned. Luca, I've been watching from a distance. That woman wasn't right for you. She was using you. Anyone could see it. Using me? For your money, your connections, your name. She's a social climber, Luca. A nobody who attached herself to you for status. Something flared in Luca's chest, a defensive Sade that surprised even him. She's not a nobody. She runs one of the most successful nonprofit organizations in the city. She's raised over $50 million for education programs, which she used to get access to wealthy donors like you, Nyah interrupted smoothly. Think about it. How did you meet? At a charity gala. Her territory. Her hunting ground. Luca frowned. It sounded plausible, but it didn't feel true. Why are you here, Nyah? He asked suddenly. Really, after 10 years, why today? For just a moment, a flicker so brief he almost missed it, something cold passed through Nyah's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by soft vulnerability. Because I realized I made a mistake, she said, reaching for his hand. Because I spent 10 years chasing a career that never made me happy. Because every relationship I had, I compared to what we had. And I couldn't let you marry someone else without telling you that I never stopped loving you. She leaned closer. I'm here because you're my white moonlight, Luca. You always have been. The words should have filled him with joy. This was what he'd wanted for a decade. The woman he'd never gotten over, finally returning, finally choosing him. But sitting there, her hand in his, all Luca could see was Sade's face. The dignity in her eyes as she walked away. The steadiness in her voice as she told him he didn't deserve her. The way she'd removed that ring, slowly, deliberately, like she was reclaiming herself. Sade hadn't begged, hadn't screamed, hadn't fallen apart. She'd just left. Like she'd always known she deserved better than what he was giving her. And for the first time, Luca wondered if she'd been right. Here's what destroys me about this moment. Luca Voss spent 2 years with a woman who loved him completely, who saw through his walls, who showed up for him every single day. And he spent those same 2 years holding a piece of himself back, comparing her to a memory, waiting for a ghost to return. He had everything, and he threw it away for an idea, a fantasy, a woman who'd already proven once that she would leave when things got hard. How many of you have been Sade, loving someone who was still holding on to someone else, giving your whole heart to someone who only gave you half of theirs? How many of you have been Luca, so obsessed with what you lost that you couldn't see what you had? Subscribe if you've ever realized, too late, that the person standing in front of you was worth more than the person living in your memory. Because sometimes we don't recognize love until we've already destroyed it. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, the truth began to surface. It started with a phone call. Luca's head of security, Marcus Webb, had been doing routine background checks on everyone who'd attended the wedding. Standard procedure for someone of Luca's profile. What he found on Nyah Brooks was anything but routine. "She's broke," Marcus reported, "filed for bankruptcy 8 months ago. Her modeling career ended 3 years ago. She's been living off credit cards and loans from increasingly sketchy sources." Luca sat in his study, the phone pressed to his ear. "That doesn't make sense. She's been photographed at high-end events all over Europe. Staged, paid appearances, some of them funded by credit, some of them funded by..." Marcus hesitated. "You're not going to like this." "Tell me." "Congressman David Mercer. He's been her primary financial support for the past 2 years, in exchange for companionship." Luca felt sick. She ended things with Mercer 6 weeks ago, right before she started planning her return to New York. To you. The timeline clicked into place. Nyah hadn't come back because she loved him. She'd come back because her meal ticket had dried up and she needed a new one. "There's more," Marcus continued. "We pulled her communications. She's been talking to someone at your company, feeding them information about your schedule, your wedding plans, your security arrangements." "Who?" "We're still tracking it down, but whoever it is, they've been helping her plan this for months. The timing of her entrance, the white dress, the exact moment during the vows. It was all choreographed." Luca hung up and sat in silence. For 10 years, he'd carried Nyah Brooks in his heart, like a sacred memory. The one who got away, the love of his life. And she'd been planning to use him the entire time. He thought about the way she'd looked at him in that hotel suite, the practiced vulnerability, the carefully crafted words. "You're my white moonlight, Luca." He'd wanted so desperately to believe it, but it had all been a performance. Meanwhile, Sade Monroe, the woman he'd publicly humiliated, had genuinely loved him, had never asked for anything, had walked away with more dignity than he'd ever shown her. He'd traded gold for glitter, and now he had neither. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Check the news. You're going to want to see this." Luca opened his browser. The headline hit him like a punch. "Voss wedding scandal. The real story behind the white moonlight. Crash." Someone had leaked everything. Nyah's bankruptcy, her relationship with Congressman Mercer, her calculated return to Luca's life. The story painted a devastating picture, a washed-up model who'd manipulated a grieving billionaire into abandoning his bride at the altar. And at the bottom of the article, a quote from Nyah's former assistant. "She used to laugh about it, said Luca was so easy to manipulate because he'd never gotten over her. All she had to do was show up, and he'd forget anyone else existed." Luca stared at the screen, his hands shaking. She'd been laughing at him. For a decade, he'd worshipped a woman who thought he was a fool, and the woman who'd actually loved him was gone. Here's what Nyah Brooks understood that Luca didn't. She knew he'd never gotten over her, knew he compared every woman to the memory of what they'd had, knew that if she showed up at exactly the right moment, wearing the right dress, saying the right words, he'd abandon everything to chase the ghost of their past. She weaponized his nostalgia against him, and it worked, because Luca wasn't in love with Nyah. He was in love with the idea of Nyah, the idealized memory, the fantasy of what could have been. He'd spent 10 years chasing a woman who never existed, while ignoring the real woman standing right in front of him. How many of us do the same thing, chase memories instead of building futures, compare real people to fantasy versions of exes who never loved us the way we imagined? Subscribe if you've ever realized that the person you were pining for was never who you thought they were, that your white moonlight was just a projection of your own loneliness, and that real love, imperfect, present, showing up every day, is worth more than any memory. Everything fell apart faster than Luca could have imagined. The Monroe family, despite their grace, quietly pulled their connections from every business venture involving Luca Voss. Within a week, 3 major deals collapsed. 2 board members resigned. His company's stock dropped 14%. The society pages were merciless. Voss abandons bride for bankrupt ex. Billionaire's wedding disaster. How he lost everything for a scammer. Sade Monroe emerges victorious as ex-fiancé crashes and burns. Nyah Brooks disappeared. Fled to Europe when the story broke. blocking Luca's calls, leaving him with nothing but a mounting pile of regrets. The apartment he'd given her access to, cleared out. The promises of rekindled love evaporated like morning fog. He'd been used, spectacularly, publicly, humiliatingly. And the worst part, he deserved it. Luca sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the engagement ring Sade had left on the altar. Someone had retrieved it, placed it in a velvet box, delivered it to his door like a condolence card. 3 carats. Flawless. Custom designed to match her eyes. He'd spent 6 months designing this ring, and maybe 6 hours actually learning who she was. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos he'd never really looked at before. Sade at a charity event, surrounded by children from the schools her organization supported. Sade receiving an award for her work in educational equity. Sade speaking at a conference, her words powerful and clear. She'd built something real, something that mattered, and he'd reduced her to a backup option. A placeholder until his ghost came home. He found an interview she'd given a year ago before they'd gotten engaged. "I don't believe in being someone's second choice. Life's too short to love someone who's still holding on to someone else. If you can't give me all of you, I'd rather walk away with my dignity intact." She'd warned him, literally told the world who she was, and he hadn't been listening. There was a knock at his door. He wasn't expecting anyone. His assistant had cleared his schedule indefinitely, citing personal matters. Everyone who might visit was either avoiding him or actively celebrating his downfall. He opened the door. Sade Monroe stood in the hallway. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked nothing like the radiant bride from 4 days ago. She looked more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. "Sade," he breathed. I didn't expect." "I'm not here for you," she said flatly. "I'm here because someone needs to tell you what's actually happening, and apparently I'm the only person left who will." She walked past him into the penthouse, her shoulders tense, her expression guarded. "Your company has a mole," she said, turning to face him. "Someone inside has been feeding information to Nyah and to a group of investors who've been planning a hostile takeover for months." Luca blinked. "What?" "The wedding wasn't just about humiliating me. It was about destabilizing you, making you look weak, distracted, emotionally compromised, so that when the takeover bid comes, and it's coming, Luca, probably within the week, you won't be able to fight back." "How do you know this?" "Because my uncle sits on 3 corporate boards, including one that's been approached about supporting the takeover." Her jaw tightened. "He called me yesterday, asked if I wanted them to proceed, as payback for what you did to me." Luca's blood ran cold. "And what did you say?" Sade held his gaze. "I said no." Luca stared at her in disbelief. "Why?" he asked. "After what I did to you, after I humiliated you in front of everyone we know, why would you protect me?" Sade walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "Because I'm not you, Luca." The words were quiet but devastating. "I don't make decisions based on old wounds. I don't let the worst moments define how I treat people, and I don't destroy someone's life just because they hurt me." She turned to face him. "What you did at that wedding was cruel. It was public. It was humiliating. And I will never forget the way it felt to stand at that altar and watch you choose a ghost over me." Luca couldn't meet her eyes. "But I refuse to become bitter because of it. I refuse to let your choice turn me into someone I don't recognize. So I told my uncle to back off. Not for you, but for me. Because revenge would cost me more than it would ever cost you." She pulled a folder from her bag and set it on his coffee table. "This is everything I know about the takeover. Names, timelines. The mole inside your company. It's your CFO, Daniel Kessler. He's been working with Nyah and the investor group for at least 6 months." Luca reached for the folder with shaking hands. "Sade, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. I didn't come here for an apology. I came here because despite everything, I believe you're not a bad person. You're a broken person. There's a difference." She moved toward the door. "Wait," Luca said. "Please, just wait." Sade paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I'm sorry," Luca said. I know those words are worthless. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know, what I did wasn't about you. It was never about you. I know, Sade said quietly. That's what made it hurt so much. I gave you everything, Luca, and I wasn't even competing with a real person. I was competing with a fantasy, a memory you'd rather hold on to than let yourself be happy. She opened the door. I hope you get help. I hope you learn to let go of whatever's keeping you trapped in the past. And I hope, someday, you find someone you can actually see. Because I was right there, Luca, loving you, choosing you, every single day. Her voice cracked slightly. And you never saw me. She walked out, and this time, Luca didn't follow. 6 months later, Luca Voss saved his company. The information Sade provided exposed Daniel Kessler and stopped the takeover before it could launch. Nyah Brooks was named in a fraud investigation connected to Congressman Mercer. The whole conspiracy unraveled publicly. But Luca didn't celebrate. He stepped down as CEO, handed control to a leadership team he trusted, donated $100 million to educational nonprofits, including Sade's organization, anonymously, no strings attached. He started therapy, real therapy, twice a week for 6 months, unpacking the childhood wounds that made him chase unavailable love, the abandonment issues that made Nyah's departure feel like a fatal blow rather than a natural ending. He learned to let go, not of the memory of Sade that he carried with him as a reminder of what he'd destroyed, but of the ghost of Nyah, the fantasy he'd built, the white moonlight that had never been real. He didn't reach out to Sade, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to win her back, because she'd been right. She deserved someone who saw her from the beginning, someone who didn't need to lose her to understand what he had. And Luca, he deserved to be alone until he became someone worth loving. Sade Monroe's organization received a record-breaking year of donations after the wedding scandal made headlines. Ironically, the publicity she never wanted brought funding she'd always needed. She used every dollar to build new schools, expand programs, change lives. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about Luca, about what they could have been if he'd been whole, if he'd chosen her without reservation, if she'd been enough to quiet the ghosts in his heart. But she didn't regret walking away, because Sade Monroe had learned something precious at that altar. Her worth wasn't determined by whether someone chose her. It was determined by whether she chose herself. And she had. The end. Here's what this story teaches us about love. You can love someone completely and still not be right for them. You can give everything you have and still walk away with nothing. You can be perfect and still be invisible to someone chasing a ghost. That's not your failure, that's theirs. Sade Monroe did nothing wrong. She loved honestly, showed up fully, and offered Luca something real. But he was too haunted to receive it, too trapped in the past to see the present. Her choice to walk away wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. It was recognizing that she deserved a love that didn't require competition with a memory. And her choice to help Luca anyway, despite everything, wasn't about him. It was about her, about who she wanted to be, about refusing to let his cruelty transform her into someone bitter. Maybe you've been Sade, loving someone who couldn't see you, walking away, because you knew you deserved more. Maybe you've been Luca, so obsessed with what you lost, that you destroyed what you had. Wherever you are, subscribe if you believe that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. That helping someone who hurt you is a choice, not an obligation. And that the right person won't make you compete with ghosts. Because you deserve to be someone's first choice, not their white moonlight, their sun. Bye.